The pages shook in my hands, not from weight, but from the way my pulse slammed through my wrist like it was trying to escape. 42 pages. Cross-check data from 5 major ports, 3 continents, 2 inside contacts. 1 month without a full night's sleep, and it was about to be fed to the wolves. I stepped into the Atlantic Horizon Freight Executive Boardroom in Boston like I was carrying a loaded weapon to a water gun fight. The quarterly forecasting review was already in motion. Vince Ellery's voice ricocheting off the glass like nails on a chalkboard. He was preaching momentum, market synergy, and God help me, emotional throughput. I waited for him to stop before sliding my packet across the table. Q2 through Q4 modeling, I said, steady as stone before a storm. My forecast accounted for port slowdowns, factory delays in Shenzhen, and looming strikes from 2 key suppliers. Vince skimmed it like a menu he already disliked. Wow, that's bleak. It's real, I replied. If we don't adjust procurement now, our biggest clients will be empty-handed by September. He laughed. Marion, we're not publishing doomsday manifestos. As if facts were a mood and optimism cured shipping delays. Then came the part I'll never forget. He reached across the table, opened my spreadsheet, and started typing over my numbers. Replacing weeks of research with a magical 12% growth projection like this was a motivational poster. Let's keep our feet in the real world, yeah? He smirked like a frat boy winning beer pong with my own cup. I didn't argue. I sat there invisible while he built a fantasy out of my work. When the meeting ended, I walked straight to my desk, opened the version I'd emailed myself 2 nights before, time-stamped, digitally, signed untouched. And right there, I decided if they ignored my forecast, I wouldn't fight them in the room. I'd let reality do it for me. Time-stamped, digitally signed, full file history. I opened a fresh document and titled it, Vince's Farewell Tour d'XLSX. That's where I started logging everything. Because I'd seen this circus before. The glossy, over-optimistic forecasts. The blind faith in charts designed to impress in a slide deck but collapse in the real world. The executive who grins through every red flag until they're standing in an empty warehouse asking why the shelves are bare. And every time they find some analyst to blame. Not this time. I backed up my models on a flash drive, then again to a secure folder on my personal cloud. 3 passwords, 1 decoy file. I even printed a hard copy and tucked it into a manila envelope hidden in my sewing cabinet at home. Paranoid, maybe. But I don't believe in corporate safety nets. I believe in receipts. The next day, a calendar invite popped up, team realignment discussion 15 minutes. Might as well have been titled Corporate Execution by PowerPoint. Vince started the meeting with his fake warmth. Nothing personal, Marion. We're just going in a more aggressive direction. Toward the cliff, I muttered. What was that? Good luck, I said, smiling the kind of smile that looks friendly until it's not. By Friday, I was off the forecasting team. By Monday, Vince was on the company newsletter quoted as leading our bold new growth strategy. By Wednesday, the first supplier I'd flagged shut down their shipping lanes without warning. Port unrest in Qingdao. Vince called it a small hiccup. I just saved another copy of my report under a new name, Hiccup or 01 XX. HR came next. A woman with the voice you'd use to coax a stray cat into a box. Marion? This isn't personal. It's part of a strategic realignment. Strategic realignment corporate code for shoving you aside without the paperwork of a firing. They didn't even bother to make it look like something else. My access to the forecasting folder vanished before the meeting ended. My Slack channel grayed out like I'd been digitally exercised. By the time I reached my desk, the last email I'd sent to procurement bounced back with an auto reply. You have reached the inbox of a non-active contributor. No, I wasn't fired. They were far too spineless for that. They just moved me to competitive intelligence, which in this company means reading competitor blogs and praying for a merger. I knew better. This wasn't the end. This was the setup. My new desk was jammed between the vending machine and a window with a wasp nest wedged in the frame. Strategic realignment, sure. Across the floor, Vince was in full performance mode. He'd called an emergency board update to unveil his freshly corrected forecasting model. From my corner, I watched through the glass as he waved his arms over my charts, conveniently cropped so my name was nowhere in sight. I didn't need sound to know the script. Upside potential. Accelerated growth curve. Optimistic tailwinds. Tailwinds. Vince. We sell industrial bearings, not daydreams. I clicked into my inbox and pulled up the email I'd sent myself. Full forecast report. Attachments intact. Data untouched. Subject line Q2 Q4 forecast. Original unedited. Timestamped a week before his meeting my insurance policy. Then I opened the second file, a clean, annotated version of my model with a note at the top. If I get hit by a bus or corporate nonsense, read this first. That one lived on an encrypted flash drive tucked into my purse next to the emergency ibuprofen and a spare lipstick. Because here's the thing, Vince could overwrite my numbers in a boardroom. But he couldn't overwrite what was about to happen. I started making copies, not just of the forecast, but of every piece of supporting evidence. Emails from procurement raising early alarms, Slack messages where I warned about shipment volatility, even a voicemail from a logistics contact in Singapore saying, "Your numbers are dead on, Marion. I don't know why they're not listening." I transcribed them all, saved each in 3 places, 2 digital, 1 analog, burned a CD just to be petty. Then I made a private cloud folder titled Truth Bomb, filled with every scrap I'd need when this whole thing went up in smoke. The second domino was already wobbling. Supply chains aren't abstract to me, they're living, breathing things, and I can smell when one's bleeding. I'd lived through the 2015 West Coast port strike. I'd seen what happens when corporate optimism slams headfirst into reality. And most of all, I knew Vince. The way his nostrils flared when someone else looked competent. The way he puffed up when the board nodded, even if he was talking nonsense. Fine. Let him shine. I had patience. And I had records. While Vince strutted through all-hands meetings, claiming he owned the future, I started making my own quiet calls. So drop your thoughts below, share your own stories, and if you've ever rooted for the underdog who refused to stay down, hit that subscribe button. The more we share these stories, the harder it becomes for people like Vince to get away with it. I didn't call competitors. I called clients, old contacts, procurement heads I trusted. Just quiet, off-the-record conversations. Hypotheticals. If you were looking for alternative sourcing in Q3, I'd ask, what would you need to know? I never mentioned my model. Never brought up the so-called realignment. I just asked questions and listened. One VP from a major Midwest distributor finally said, "We've been hearing rumblings. Think we're actually going to see delays?" I paused, smiled into the phone. I'd start preparing a plan B. Vince's name was still plastered at the bottom of every glossy deck the company passed around like gospel. But the fuse was already burning. It all kicked off on a Monday, because of course it did. The subject line hit every inbox like a brick through stained glass. Urgent all shipments from Qingdao temporarily suspended. Inside 2 grim paragraphs about labor unrest at Port 4B. Dock worker strikes, indefinite delays. Translation: one of our top-tier component suppliers had just decided to play with gasoline. Procurement lit up the group chat like they'd discovered fire. Does anyone have backup routing? This will hit all September POs. Another ping. Can we escalate with Chengdu partners fast? Then came the emojis. In this place, that always meant panic. From my exile beside the humming vending machine, I watched it unfold. It was like watching a house burn, while the homeowners argued over curtain colors. And then, Vince did what Vince does best. He waved it off like someone had just complained about a stale donut in the break room. "One hiccup doesn't sink a ship," he said, standing in front of the whiteboard like a motivational speaker at a gas station convention. "Let's not catastrophize." This from the same man who called my forecast a doomsday manifesto, now zen mastering his way through a full-blown supply chain aneurysm. His plan: wait it out. Let optimism fix it. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Marty, CSG Industrial. I hadn't heard from him in over a year, not since a client barbecue where he tried to recruit me over peach schnapps. "Tell me you've seen this port thing," he said. "I've seen it. You still got eyes on your old forecast, I do. A pause. You were right, weren't you? I leaned back in my chair watching chaos brew through the glass wall of the conference room. Close enough. Close enough, I said. Marty exhaled through his teeth. Our October line's screwed if we don't pivot. You think it's time to look at alternative sourcing? I glanced around. No one was paying attention. Vince was too busy explaining to the sales VP how geopolitics can't be modeled, man. My fingers moved over the keyboard without hesitation. I'd start identifying alternates, I said calm and even. Even if it costs more. Speed's about to matter more than price. A pause. Off the record. Way off. Thank you. And if you see anything else coming. We hung up. No promises, no email trail, just the kind of conversation you have when the truth starts tapping on the window and only a few people bother to look. Back inside the walls of denial, Vince was rehearsing lines for his upcoming investor call. He planned to describe the supply disruption as temporary regional fluidity. I almost laughed. If there were a corporate poetry slam, Vince would win by sheer bullshit velocity. But under my sarcasm, I felt something shift. My model, the one he'd buried like an embarrassing secret, was coming alive, proving itself in real time. It was like an old machine humming back to life. I started sleeping with my laptop open again. Not for work, for updates, live shipment delays, social media chatter from dock workers, even TikToks from truckers in Guangzhou, live streaming the backup with captions like, "Guess who's not making quota this month?" Each data point clicked into place like teeth on a gear. I updated my private doc quietly. No broadcasts, just careful line edits and margin notes. Qingdao down. Chennai likely next. Prepare alternates for Class B component lines. Verify steel inventory. And still, I waited. Because this wasn't the explosion. This was the tremor, the air pressure shift before the tornado eats your mailbox. Vince's forecast was still the official gospel. He paraded it to anyone who asked. Procurement was still duct taping alternatives together while pretending the ship wasn't taking on water. But clients had started whispering. Suppliers were starting to glitch. And me, I was preparing not for revenge, but for proof. It came as a LinkedIn message first, because of course it did. Heard some chatter. I leaned back, sipped my coffee, and smiled. Here it comes. The message came from Richard Whitaker, retired board member, former CFO, and the only executive I've ever met who still wears a calculator watch and once called a spreadsheet sexy. He'd mentored me back when I was a junior analyst, back when this company still listened to the quiet people in the room. I still remember him pulling me aside after my first brutal budget meeting and saying, just because the loudest guy wins the room doesn't mean he wins the quarter. The next morning, I called him from the loading dock, cooler air. No curious ears, unless you were blocking the forklift ramp. He answered on the first ring. Tell me it's not as bad as they're saying. That depends on who they is. I've heard 2 forecasts, he said, voice low and rough, like gravel under a semi's tires. One says we're about to break revenue records. The other says we're about to start losing million-dollar accounts to a clogged toilet in the supply chain. I wrote the second one. Silence. Long. Deliberate. Then, send me the full report. Timestamps. Timeline. Everything you did. I didn't hesitate. 15 minutes later, his reply came in just 3 words. Keep everything quietly. I stared at the message. Why quietly? I typed back. Because loud gets buried. Quiet gets investigated. No emojis. No fluff. Just wisdom wrapped in warning. That same afternoon, Vince held a company-wide all hands. I tuned in from my sad little corner next to the humming vending machine, watching him beam through my screen like the protagonist in a bad comedy. We're on track for a record-breaking Q3, he announced, smiling so hard it looked painful. Our new numbers show accelerated market demand, reduced supplier friction, investor confidence at an all-time high. Reduced supplier friction. A full container of steel components was currently bobbing uselessly in a port outside Ho Chi Minh like an orphaned suitcase. He clicked to the next slide, a chart so inflated it could have floated away. My forecast had shown a 4% contraction in availability. His showed 11% growth. I squinted at the axis labels. Monthly unit assurance, a metric I'm fairly sure doesn't exist. Someone in the chat, Jorge from Client Success, asked, "Are we adjusting any numbers to reflect the APAC supply issue?" Vince replied without missing a beat. "We're being proactive, not reactive." Translation: no. Then came the investor slides. A section titled, "Confidence Through Momentum, TM." Yes, trademarked for God's sake. Underneath were quotes from partner firms, most of them at least 2 years old, dragged out like puppets at a funeral. And still the chat filled with clapping emojis. Heart reacts. GIFs of dogs in sunglasses. I closed my laptop, sat still for a long time listening to the vending machine grumble through its idle cycle. They were erasing me, doing it with pastel graphics, fake terminology, and recycled jargon, and everyone was clapping like hypnotized seals. But my data wasn't gone. Couldn't be wiped by a slide deck. It lived in backups, timelines, spreadsheets buried under file names like yoga, retreat, budget.xlsx, and petty cash 2019 AXLS. I wasn't going to fight Vince with volume. I was going to fight him with gravity. Clients were watching. I knew because 2 more emails came in before lunch, one from a procurement officer I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. "Do you think this is going to get worse?" Another from a competitor's analyst subject line, only. "You were right, huh?" The cracks weren't in the numbers. They were in the trust. And Vince, still smiling, still talking, still building his throne out of matchsticks, telling everyone not to worry about the smoke. The second supplier went down on a Wednesday. The third followed on Friday. Grim punctuation marks no one wanted to read. Chennai shut down from flash flooding. Factory lines submerged, raw material transit delayed by weeks. Then Jakarta strikes this time. Steel tube manufacturer. One of our critical inputs for a heavy rig assembly client. I'd marked both suppliers in red back in February. No one listened. Now the alarms were blaring. By Monday, inboxes lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Client 2 escalated to legal. Client 5 threatened to terminate the contract. Failure to deliver. Executive response needed. Inside those emails was desperation account managers, begging leadership for guidance, clawing for something, anything to tell clients. The tone was unmistakable people who'd been selling dreams that now felt like lies. And Vince nowhere. Missed his first internal check-in since his record-breaking Q3 speech. Scheduled the second, canceled the third. Whispers said he told his assistant to screen all unrecognized numbers. Me, I'd already taken a call that morning from the VP of Procurement at Client 1. "Look, I know you're not technically on point anymore," the VP of Procurement said, "but you're the only one who flagged this 6 months ago. We need a plan." I didn't hesitate. I already had one. "I've mapped 3 alternate suppliers for your rig components," I said, pulling up my private dashboard. 2 domestic, 1 in South Korea. Lead times are longer, but they're still shipping. Want me to send over contacts? "You do that, I already did. Check your inbox." A pause. "Are you even authorized to do this?" "Nope." Another pause. "Good." The next day, they sent me a $50 gift card to some artisanal coffee shop in Vermont. I don't even drink coffee, but it meant something. Someone in the middle of this slow-motion train wreck saw me. Back at the company, Vince issued a 3-line memo about the delays, called them unexpected logistics variables, and assured everyone that leadership was actively assessing solutions. No apology, no accountability. Just enough syllables to make it sound like he was doing something. The team, once a clapping emoji crowd, had gone silent. Slack reactions dwindled. The CNQ3 growth channel went dark. One account manager posted a meme of a dumpster on fire floating down a flooded street. It got 147 reactions. No reprimand. I kept working not for the company and definitely not for Vince for the clients. I'd built those relationships over years. Not the golf course kind Vince liked, but the quiet ones, late-night emails, honest numbers helping them build reorder buffers when no one else cared. That week, I sent 5 more alternate sourcing plans. Quiet, targeted, efficient. I didn't ask for credit, but credit came anyway. One client looped me into a vendor email chain. Another copied me on an internal sourcing approval. And late Friday night, an email arrived from a client exec I'd never spoken to before. Subject, appreciate your clarity. Body. If your leadership doesn't recognize it, others will. I read it 3 times, then archived it with the rest of my receipts. This wasn't about being a hero. It was about not letting fools burn the house down while insisting it was a sauna. Vince still wore the crown. On paper, he still owned the forecast. But out here, where trust lived and money moved, I was already queen. And the warning came, not with sirens, but with silence. Slack channels slowed to a crawl. Meetings once filled with half the department were now invite only. The air had changed. Directors were whispering in doorways with the urgency of people realizing the iceberg wasn't melting. It was rising. By Thursday, even the legal department, normally as animated as a tomb, started pinging people for clarity meetings. These weren't disciplinary. They were the kind of hushed conversations that began with, "We're just trying to get our arms around the timeline." That was the word timeline. The Q3 pipeline had gone from a boardroom trophy to a potential liability exhibit in less than a week. Rumors were moving faster than emails. One exec told their assistant to dig up every draft model submitted this fiscal year. Another was overheard muttering, "If we go down for this, it won't be because of a damn spreadsheet." Somewhere between the quiet legal scramble and the top floor panic, the CEO caught wind. It started with a phrase I never thought I'd hear float back to me. Forecast inconsistencies. I heard it secondhand from a friend in finance. The CEO had said it aloud twice in a room full of senior leadership, tapping a printed slide from the last all hands like it owed him money. I sat perfectly still in my corner cubicle, pretending to review supplier logs while my ears burned. The problem wasn't invisibility anymore. It was visibility. And visibility came with risk. If they sniffed me out too soon, Vince would bury me again with spin or worse with legal muscle. I needed someone else to break the seal. That's when Richard Whitaker stepped in. No warning, no preamble. Just a Dropbox link in my inbox with 1-sentence board review scheduled. These will speak louder than you ever could. Inside the folder was everything I'd sent him. My original report forecast files, screenshots, Slack exports, dates, times, and the deltas between my model and Vince's parade-worthy fiction. Untouched. No edits, no commentary, just raw, screaming data. I stared at the link like it might explode. Once the board had it, there'd be no pulling it back. No half measures, no plausible deniability. The truth was now a live grenade. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. The next morning, the company calendar updated quietly. Special session Q3 pipeline and projections review. No agenda, no attendees listed, just the CEO's initials. By noon, Vince was walking faster in the halls, avoiding eye contact. His assistant was printing everything. Inbox dumps hard copies of decks, even draft notes. One intern joked he looked like a man building a paper boat for a flood. The temperature had shifted. Directors who once parroted Vince's buzzwords were suddenly unavailable for his check-ins. Procurement went dark. Client success canceled its Q&A. The marketing team pushed out a revised Q3 messaging deck that was basically a long way of saying, "Don't promise anything." Nobody said my name. But twice that week, I caught people looking at me for a beat too long, once in the hallway and once in the break room where someone from Risk glanced over and muttered, "Hell of a forecast, huh?" I just smiled. The storm I'd warned them about had finally arrived, and this time I wasn't the one getting soaked. The first contract termination landed just after 900 a.m. Client 4, the big one. 7 figures a quarter gone. Subject line. Notice of termination. Breach of fulfillment clause. The second hit before lunch. The third before close of business. 3 in a single day. Different signatures. Different phrasing. Same message you promised, you didn't deliver. The revenue dashboard went from green to bleeding red like someone had drained the company's bloodstream. The aggressively optimistic Q3 projection now looked like a bad joke pinned to a gravestone. Vince scrambled into damage control mode, hosting a town hall over Zoom, where his blazer barely hid the spreading sweat stains. These are unforeseen variables, he insisted, jaw so tight you could have cracked granite on it. Geopolitical dynamics, market elasticity, unexpected cascading failures. Translation: I have no idea what I'm doing, but if I say it confidently enough, maybe you'll blame the universe instead of me. Someone in finance wasn't buying it. That afternoon, a slide appeared in the Rs and Ops Intel Slack channel. No name, no context, just a simple comparison chart. Left side Vince's Q3 forecast, right side M. Cooper Feb's submission, color-coded, brutal. Vince's slide, 11% growth supply stability, top-line surge. My slide, 4% contraction flagged ports escalation risks by mid-Q3. Beneath each the timestamp, Vince's March 3rd. Mine, February 7th. No commentary, none needed. It was a murder scene in Excel. People started whispering, not just quietly, but strategically. Wait, was that the forecast? She got sidelined over. Didn't she get moved for being too negative? Where the hell is she now? By the next morning, the board had snapped the rubber band. Company-wide request. Submit all Q3 and Q4 forecast source materials, including revision history. Due by end of day. Vince tried to spin it, claiming cross-department collaboration for transparency. But word spread fast. His calendar was suddenly packed wall to wall with legal meetings. Then quietly, I got an email. No subject, no name, just one line. They're asking questions. Wanna talk. My heart jumped, not in panic, but in recognition. I'd been waiting for this. The system's voice, once tuned to ignore me, was finally clearing its throat. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reopened my truth bomb folder and triple-checked the access logs. Everything was intact, every file, every note, every projection. All raw, all unedited. Numbers I'd crunched at my kitchen table weeks before the company pretended everything was smooth sailing. I remember the night I logged the Jakarta port risk while microwaving leftover dumplings. I remembered thinking, if they ignore this, they're going to bleed. Now they were bleeding. Vince's reputation, polished smug, built on sound bites and handshakes, was in freefall. His pet execs stopped CCing him. His talking points vanished from marketing decks. Even the intern he used to bark at had stopped refilling his water bottle. Meanwhile, my LinkedIn was lighting up with requests from strangers sporting VP titles and consulting firm logos. No one had said my name publicly, yet, but they would. The collapse had begun, and the truth was getting louder. At 6:42 a.m., the invite dropped, emergency investor live stream, mandatory attendance. No agenda, no prep packet, just a broadcast link. By 1:00 a.m., the office buzzed like a hive that had just discovered half its honey was gasoline. Directors paced with phones to their ears. Assistants looked like they were plotting evacuation routes. Slack slowed to a crawl. Everyone knew what this was. The reckoning. I wasn't planning to watch. I'd sat through too many hollow we value transparency speeches, but something told me this would be different. So I brewed the darkest coffee in my cabinet and opened my laptop. The CEO's face filled the screen, stone-faced, no tie, barely blinking. Vince sat beside him, looking like a man who'd just been told the parachute might be decorative. "Thank you for joining us," the CEO began. Voice flat as drywall. "We're here to address concerns about Q3 performance, contractual liabilities, and forecast discrepancies." That last word landed like a wrench. Vince jumped in too fast, rambling through a desperate word salad about macroeconomic turbulence and unexpected forecast headwinds. The CEO let him dig, then held up a printout I knew instantly. My forecast, dated February 7th. The one they'd buried. "Can anyone tell me," he said slowly, "why we fired the one person who got it right? If you've made it this far, you already know I didn't win this fight with shouting matches or office politics. I won it with patience, proof, and a stubborn refusal to let someone else rewrite my reality. And now, I want to hear from you. If you've ever been in my shoes watching someone else take credit for your work, or worse, bury it? Tell me in the comments. What would you have said to Vince if you were sitting in that boardroom when the CEO held up my forecast? I read every single one, and your words aren't just for me. They're for everyone who's been silenced in a place that demanded their silence. Here's the truth. I learned you don't have to fight every battle in the open. In fact, some of the most decisive victories happen quietly behind the scenes, while the other side doesn't even realize you're moving the pieces. Keep records. Timestamp your work. Store backups where no one can touch them. Don't rely on corporate memory. It's astonishing how fast that gets erased when it's convenient. And above all, know your worth. They can sideline you, rewrite your job title, move your desk to the corner by the vending machine, but they can't erase the value you've built if you keep your own receipts. So drop your thoughts below. Share your own stories, and if you've ever rooted for the underdog who refused to stay down, hit that subscribe button. The more we share these stories, the harder it becomes for people like Vince to get away with it. This wasn't just my win. It's proof that dignity and truth can outlast spin, and that's something worth talking about.